Hey guys, thank you for your patience. Here's the little mini lecture review for the quiz from weeks 4 and 6. We'll just speed right through it. Okay, so I want you to remember, the different structures of the brain, right? Going from that brainstem all the way up to the cerebrum, right? Remember that the medulla oblongata, it's going to be that physical connection between the the spinal cord and the brain, right? That medulla oblongata is going to relay that sensory information to the thalamus and other portions of the brainstem. Remember, anything coming from that spinal cord area is going to go through that medulla oblongata area. If we go more superior, we have the pons, right? That's going to relay sensory information to the cerebellum and the thalamus, right? So it's going to send that information to the thalamus, and it's going to send that information to the cerebellum. Remember, the cerebellum is going to be just posterior to the pons, okay? We also have the mesencephalon, right? That's going to be able to provide processes for visual and auditory data, right? The mesencephalon, that midbrain. And then we have the diencephalon, right? That's going to contain your thalamus, your epithalamus, your hypothalamus, and we're going to have that thalamus, right? The two thalamus right here in that region, okay? And that's going to be able to relay and process sensory information, okay? And then, of course, we have the cerebrum, okay? That's going to be where we have that conscious thought, intellectual functions, and memory storage and processing, a lot of things up in there. And in the back, or the bottom, I should say, we have the cerebellum. That's going to be able to coordinate complex muscle coordination, right? And patterns, okay? So I want you guys to remember, excuse me, this image right here when we're talking about the cerebrum, okay? So remember, the two cerebral hemispheres are going to be separated by that longitudinal fissure. Coming off of that longitudinal fissure, from a lateral point of view, is going to be this central sulcus, right? And in each cerebral hemisphere, we can divide the brain up based, on its location or the region, based on the bone that it sits under, right? So, the front part of the head is going to be like that frontal bone. So the front part of the brain is going to be that frontal lobe, right? Then the top is going to be the parietal lobe. The back is going to be the occipital lobe. And on the sides, we have the temporal lobes, right? So the same thing as the skull, right? So I do want you to look at the central sulcus right here, right? And just anterior to the central sulcus, right, we're going to be in the frontal lobe, okay? In the frontal lobe, that's going to consist, right, of the primary motor cortex, okay? Primary motor cortex is going to be in the frontal lobe. Now, posterior to the central sulcus, right, so in this region, this is the parietal lobe. This is where we're going to find the primary somatosensory cortex, okay? So again, primary motor cortex, frontal lobe, primary somatosensory cortex, parietal lobe, okay? And then you also want to remember, in this occipital lobe back here, we have this visual cortex, right? So that cranial nerve will come in here from the eyes, right? Synapse with the neurons in the thalamus, and they'll ultimately go back to the occipital lobe, and that's where the visual cortex is going to be located, okay? So remember that. So there's some cranial nerves that I want you to look at. So we know we have, the 12 cranial nerves, right? Remember cranial nerve 1, right? Olfactory nerve, cranial nerve 2, the optic nerve, right? Cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve, cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal nerve, and then we have cranial nerve 6, the abducens nerve, and here we have the cranial nerve 7, which is the facial nerve. And remember, that's going to be important, specifically in the anterior 2/3 portion of the tongue, okay? The anterior 2/3 portion of the tongue. We also have cranial nerve 8, right? That's going to be that's going to be that vestibulocochlear nerve, right? That's going to be for balance and hearing, right? Cranial nerve 8, the vestibulocochlear nerve, that's going to be for balance and hearing. If we go back for a second, we also have cranial nerve 9, right? That's your glossopharyngeal nerve. That's going to be responsible for the posterior 1/3 portion of the tongue. Okay, posterior 1/3 portion of the tongue. Remember the facial nerve, which is cranial nerve 7, that was important for the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, but the glossopharyngeal nerve is going to be important for the posterior to innervate that posterior 1/3 of the tongue. And you can kind of see it's like coming off, right, of this glossopharyngeal nerve, right? One of the branches, this linguinal branch, is innervating that posterior 1/3 of the tongue. Okay, so remember that glossopharyngeal nerve is cranial nerve 9. Okay, glossopharyngeal nerve is cranial nerve 9. And remember, of course, we have the vagus nerve, that's cranial nerve 10. The accessory nerve is cranial nerve 11, right? And then the hypoglossal nerve, that's cranial nerve 12. Okay, so just remember those two. So remember we discussed the autonomic nervous system, right? And it functions outside of our conscious awareness, right? It makes the routine adjustments in our body system. You know, it just automatically does it, right? It regulates our body temperature. It coordinates cardiovascular, respiratory, digestive, excretory, and reproductive functions. Okay. So remember, there's the sympathetic division. Okay, and this is you want to remember. You know, this is your fight or flight, right, response. Okay, this is gonna stimulate tissue metabolism, increase alertness, and prepare the body to deal with an emergency. Right, fight or flight response. The opposite, you're gonna have this rest and digest. All right, this is where we're gonna conserve energy. Right, we're gonna promote sedentary activities such as digestion, right, increased absorption, right, slower heart rate, right. We're going to constrict our pupillaries, right. So you're not going to get like bronchodilation, right. You're not going to get an increased heart rate. Okay, so this is the rest and digest, right, promoting a relaxing state, right, such as digestion. You're secreting more stomach acid, right, for more absorption. So this is going to be the rest and digest. Okay. And we also hit on, okay, well, yep, okay, sure. I just want to go to the next slide. Sorry. Okay. Finally. Now, remember we discussed one of those special sense organs, right? The hearing, such as hearing, right? So this just gives you an overview of the ear, right? The external portion of the ear, the middle ear, the internal ear. Remember that the external portion of the ear goes from the auricle, like the outside of the ear, which is made up of elastic cartilage, and it protects that external acoustic meatus of this temporal bone. Okay. Then at the end of the external ear, we have this flattened sheet, right? That's called our tympanic membrane, or your eardrum. Okay, that eardrum is going to be the divider between the external ear and the middle ear. In the middle ear, we're going to have these Miss bones, right? See the Miss bones, right? The malleus, the incus, and the stapes, right? That's going to be these bones, right? The malleus, okay? Incus, stapes, okay? They're going to be in the middle ear. These are called the auditory ossicles. Okay, I say Miss bones because it's M-I-S, Miss bones, right? But they are our auditory ossicles. Okay, remember within this middle ear, we also have this auditory tube or the eustachian tube, right? This canal right here. Okay, and remember that's going to serve to equalize the pressure in the middle ear cavity, right? With the external pressure. Okay. And then we also talked about some of the structures of the eye as well, right? But I did want to mention, remember in the internal ear. I didn't talk about the internal ear, but in the internal ear, right, or the inner ear, right, we have the sense organs for hearing and equilibrium, right. We have this vestibule here, this vestibule complex for equilibrium, and then we have this cochlea, here, and that's going to be for hearing, right. And this is where you're going to have, you know, those hair cells, right. We're going to have those hair cells. Those hair cells, and those hair cells are going to be those sensory receptors in the middle ear. I'm sorry, those sensory receptors in the inner ear, right? Stimulating fluid. And then, of course, we talked about the eye. There's, you know, that avascular portion of the eye, right, where there's no blood vessels between the structure, right, and that conjunctiva. So, and that's going to be the cornea. Remember, it's just that right here, that transparent avascular portion of the eye, right? That avascular portion of the eye, that cornea, is going to be continuous with this fibrous layer, right? And that's the sclera. The sclera and the cornea makes up the fibrous layer. Remember, the sclera is just the white portion of the eye, right? That's just the white portion. As you can see, that white fibrous tissue. That's the white portion of the eye, right? And you also have the iris, right? Remember, we have this iris right here. Okay. Right? Of course, we have the pupil in the middle, that opening. But the iris, remember the iris, that's going to be that intraocular muscle that gives the eye its color. Okay. And, you know, the lack of color is going to appear blue. Right? Remember that in the anterior portion of the eye is going to be aqueous humor. Okay. And the posterior portion of the eye, right, that's where we're going to have the vitreous humor. Okay, so those are a few things I want you guys to just focus on. Remember, I know we went over a lot of things in these chapters, but I'm confident that you guys are going to do well. All right, let me know if you have any questions. All right.